Hello, this is Alex Burkett, and you're listening to the Long Game Podcast. In this episode, I talked to Chayka. Kyle is a staff writer at The New Yorker and the author of Filter World: How Algorithms Flattened Culture, which was published in January 2024. This conversation was personally very important to me and covered topics that I think are very important both from a marketing lens, but also from a human and a cultural perspective. I discovered his book, Filter World, all about how algorithms impact and affect society and culture, ironically, after I published a rant post on LinkedIn about my frustrations with algorithmic curation. In the comments section, someone I don't know, because the post went semi-viral, someone recommended this book. So I read it and it resonated. So in this conversation today, we talked about the impact of algorithms on taste and consumption, often resulting in a level of homogeneity, but also from the perspective of the creator, the person who has to rely on these algorithms to reach their intended audiences. So algorithmic distribution can often cause anxiety, frustration, burnout, resulting from the often capricious nature of algorithmic delivery. You know, a lot of spikes and valleys, and what's incentivized today is often different tomorrow. But also this feeling that kind of have to conform your thoughts and your writing and your formatting and your content to a certain style and way of thinking. We, of course, talked a lot about ways to mitigate this, algorithm cleanses, and ultimately how to bring some sense of mindfulness back to the content, the art, the food, and the culture that we create and consume. I think you'll enjoy this one. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Chayka. The way I don't know if I told you this in the email, but the way I discovered your book was I'm a marketer and I post on LinkedIn, and I was at the gym one day and I was listening to like my same old like ASAP Ferg or whatever my like lifting playlist is. And I was like, man, I kind of want to discover something new. So I went to like the artist radio station and I saw like this little bit of text on the top that said "Made for Alex." And I was like it had all these artists in there that I already listened to. And I was like, how do I escape this? Right. Like I can't discover new music if I try, even though this, Spotify ostensibly is made for discovery in some ways. So I was really upset. And I think that's like the algorithmic anxiety that you talked about. So I went over to LinkedIn, posted a rant, got a ton of traction. People were talking about like, oh, like you've got to do this differently, whatever. But within the comment section, somebody referenced you, like they tagged you and your book. So in a weird way, in an ironic twist of fate, we kind of have the algorithm to thank for this conversation.
For sure. I mean, it's kind of hard to escape the algorithmic influence in anything we consume right now. So I'm happy, my book had to critique this like algorithmic ecosystem, but it also had to exist within it. And, I'm happy whenever someone floats into view of my book.
One thing I found interesting about the first section of your book is that you sort of demystified the concept of an algorithm. Everybody probably has a different idea when they hear that word. Some people probably hear black box. I don't understand this. Facebook, like how are they, doing this crazy targeting of users? And then you've got like machine learning engineers who are like, it's a banded algorithm and reinforce, they understand like the science of it. But you brought it back actually historically. So I wonder if you could just give us a little context on like what an algorithm is in a general sense and maybe a specific sense in the context of your book.
Yeah, I think that word, the algorithm, gets overused a lot right now. It's like we use the algorithm to refer to all sorts of things and experiences and anxieties. And just in doing my research, that the word itself, algorithm, is very ancient. It's thousands of years old. And all it refers to literally is an equation. So an algorithm is an equation that takes into account some variables and produces a result for you. And in ancient Babylonian times, that was maybe, okay, how much volume of dirt am I digging out of a ditch? But today, we really use it to describe recommendation algorithms. So these are also equations, but the effect that they produce is they ingest a ton of data about what you're doing on a platform, what all the other users are doing on a digital platform. And then they crunch all that information, evaluate it by various variables like engagement or your personal preferences or traffic. And then it spits out a recommendation for a piece of content that is meant for you. So I think literally when we say the algorithm, what we're really talking about is recommender systems, which are algorithms for filtering content. And those exist almost everywhere online now. Like your Gmail inbox sorts your emails, your Spotify playlists are sorted to appeal to you, your Facebook feed is arranged so you will be most likely to pay attention to the things at the top of it. Like we're just surrounded by all of these recommendations.
There's something to be said for like the incentives of each platform in that like historically, like there's always going to be a mechanism by which you discover things, right? And maybe in the past that was like your local like church group recommended a book, or like your friend recommended somebody that you meet to go on a date with, or like it was very local in a sense.
Yeah, the human algorithm was local.
Totally. But like in these platforms, there's sort of a monetary business incentive. And this was like The Social Dilemma. I think that was the documentary about like all of like Facebook, and I can't remember if that was the name. But anyway, like you've got these growth teams who have these massive amounts of data, and they're optimizing for your attention, your eyeballs, because a lot of them are monetized via advertising dollars, right? So I think they like if you look at sort of the incentives of why you're getting recommendations, like it matters in terms of what you get recommended in a way.
Totally. I mean, it's so obvious when you think about it twice, but we don't often think about it. Like the purpose of a recommendation algorithm in your feed is not to deliver you the most interesting, unique content that is going to inspire your life. It's just to keep you paying attention so that you scroll past another ad, another sponsored post, another recommendation. Fundamentally, the platforms are not designed to inform you or educate you or deliver you enlightening stuff. Like that might happen just as a way to get you to pay attention. The real core purpose is just to sell advertising to ad clients and then to get you or us, the users, to kind of vaguely pay attention to those and click through on 0.05% of them.
Right. And there's the sense that like in some way it obviously works, right? Like these platforms have all of the data. So clearly there's something that people enjoy about the sense of comfort of getting recommended things that they're already going to like based on their past data. But simultaneously, your book has resonated. Like obviously, I reached out, I'm like, this makes so much sense to me. So in my world, like there's something missing, right? Like there's something that I want to get in front of things that I might not have gotten in front of otherwise. There's like the sense of maybe randomness is the wrong word, but I want something that I might not like from time to time.
Exactly. Like a really good recommendation is sometimes going to be wrong. Like a truly authentic, a truly human recommendation will sometimes be completely wrong for you and not adjusted to your tastes at all. Like the friend who sets you up on a bad blind date, or, a librarian recommending you a book, they might be totally off base. But at least that was like not predestined to get to you. That was like a series of more or less random events and coincidences and social effects that delivered that recommendation to you. I mean, I think what I find so problematic about the ecosystem that we're in, it's not that recommendations exist at all. Like we do need that filtering. It's often really useful. It's just that it's so omnipresent and it's just constantly second guessing you or like pre-guessing you before you can even think about something. It's supposed to be in front of your eyes. And so I just find that really deadening. Like it encourages you to be a completely passive consumer.
So it's such a complex topic, and there's so many things that I want to explore with you, from taste and like authenticity and how you get these real recommendations and the value of that. But I actually want to go straight to the end point. Like the end chapter in your book, you talked about like exiting the matrix. That's my language. I think you said like quitting the algorithms or something like that. But basically, I mean, can you explain? You basically quit the platforms for a while, right?
Yeah, I did an algorithm cleanse, I think is what I called it. So it's kind of like, going vegan for a month or doing dry January or something. It was just a way to separate myself from algorithmic recommendations and see what it was like without them. I mean, I think I relied on them too much for the way I discovered things online. I think my attention, like everyone else's, is like totally shot and I'm incapable of focusing on things. So I just wanted to isolate myself, to get off of them and quit cold turkey in a way. And what I found really was that the internet is not designed to function without algorithmic feeds anymore. Like it's actually difficult to get by without them. It's hard to find places that are not algorithmically driven at this point. And you really have to cultivate for yourself like a sense of agency and a ability to make decisions about what you're consuming. And you have to kind of think more about it. Like you have to sit there and think about, what do I want to consume right now? Not just looking at the next thing in the feed.
Well, that's the big trade-off that we've seen, I think, in technology in general, is that it's often this friction minimizing function in that humans don't want to work for things. So if you make things slightly easier, they're usually going to take that path, at least in large enough numbers to make it impactful. So like if I can order DoorDash, and not just order DoorDash, but if DoorDash can tell me exactly what I want at that time, like I'm less likely to organize a group of 3 or 4 friends, book a restaurant across town that I've not heard of, and like go to that restaurant and actually have an enjoyable time with my friends. There's this level that like the convenience and the friction makes things easier. Therefore, most of the time, most of the people are going to choose that option.
It's so true. I mean, that's it. It's kind of a fundamental human problem, as you pointed out. Like we are lazy. We will take advantage of shortcuts. And we're encouraged to do that by the way the platforms work. Like I find DoorDash very depressing in many ways, particularly when I log on and it's suggesting to me what I want to eat right now, which like to me is not a problem to be solved, but actually the point of being alive is to decide what to eat for yourself.
So absolutely. I want to actually come back to like your experience of like exiting, the algorithmic cleanse, but that reminds me, I actually noted down one thing because I saw this tweet the other day that I was like, oh my God, I have to talk to you about this. So I'm not going to mention the author. Frankly, I don't remember the author, but basically I saw this tweet where the person was talking about how they had found the perfect apartment in New York City. But the problem is, I don't know how to decorate it. Like I'm really bad at like aesthetic sense, right? So the author was like, is there some sort of a tool, maybe like an AI thing that can scan my apartment and recommend me basically everything to buy, everything to put in this? And I'm going to tell you, like it for me, it provoked some response that was like almost like revulsion. Like it was like, and I couldn't really put my finger on why, because in some areas of my life, I also sort of like outsourced my thinking to the algorithm. Netflix, for example, I'm like, hey, just tell me what to watch, right? But there was something more personal maybe about like your personal living space where I was like, if you're just going to like have, I don't know, it's like you could have an interior designer, but at least they're going to interview you and kind of like get your personal sense of style and taste. Whereas this felt so, it's like, why don't you just live in like a generic pod if you're going to do that? You're going to spend all of your time in here. Like, I don't know, like what do you like, why am I having this reaction to this?
Oh man, it's so, on one level it's sad, on another level I can totally understand it because people have a lot of anxiety about taste too. Like they want to like the right things, they want to express themselves in the right way and consume the right products and like fit in with everyone else. So when their friends come to their apartment or whoever, then it works. Like they want a generic solution in some way. But I do think there's a level on which we've just automated too much.
Yeah.
Like we expect too much to be automated. So in that case, it's like, if you are not trying to express any personal sensibility whatsoever in the space in which you live, literally, what is the point?
Right.
Like, and you might as well live in the pod hotel or live in the kind of archetypal empty white box. Though even intentionally choosing that would be more of a decision, more of an expression than just leaving it to an AI. Or even like a subreddit. Like ideally you meditate for a second, you look inside yourself and you think about, what do I like? What makes me happy? What brings me joy? And then you try to bring some of that stuff in, or you outsource it to ideally another human being who can consult with you a little bit on that and maybe point out some nice CB2 shelves or whatever. Like, yeah. I find it depressing, the idea that we could automate away every creative decision we make in our lives and somehow be happier. Like, it's like, what is the time left for? Like, what are we saving time and energy for, if not to express ourselves and make creative decisions in our own lives?
With some sense of like over-optimization that I'm hearing.
Yes, for sure.
Well, and it makes
particularly
sense
in these like personal choice areas of our life. Like, like work might as well be optimized. I don't need to write meeting scheduling emails. Like, I'm happy to have that done by a bot or an algorithm or whatever. But when it's like where am I going out to dinner? What am I putting in my apartment? What kinds of music am I listening to? If we allow that to be optimized and automated, I think we are losing something. We're losing like a human capacity.
Yeah, I think it's the sliding scale towards like the more personal, right? Like if you're optimizing like a route that you take via Uber or like via Google Maps, you're like, okay, like I may lose a little bit of serendipity on a path that I might not have taken before, but like I'm okay with that given the convenience and the faster travel time. But I think this apartment thing, like, you know, maybe like I put more value in terms of like the artwork and the furniture and whatnot that makes me happy and makes me feel at home. But then I also think about like endgame where you're like, okay, like that's your apartment, but also like the sense of like, you know, I think you hit on something really important, which is like we have this insecurity about not knowing what other people think we should like. But that could apply to ideas too, where eventually you're like, I don't know what to think about politics. Hey, AI, tell me what to think about politics. And it's like, how, like, what other areas of our life are going to be just outsourced by some sense of like, here's what you should think, here's what you should do. I think that's the sense that I'm getting from this.
I think so. I mean, it's algorithmic recommendations have occupied so many different spaces in our lives. Like, if you're on Twitter, an algorithm does inform what you think about politics. If like you're on Netflix, an algorithm shapes what you think of as film or television. On dating apps, like recommendation algorithms shape who you might, you know, have as a life partner for the next bunch of decades in your life. And they all fulfill functions. But I do think you're right. There's like a sliding scale of what you want to be personal and what you want to be efficient. And we all have to make those choices of what we invest time in and energy in. To me, it's just like music, art, design, food. Like these are the things that are worth investing yourself in and defining yourself on. And I know that's not true for everyone, but I find it's true for myself.
I think that makes sense to me. So I'm curious, like, because your experience as a writer, it's very interesting. You've got like the creator side, and you're also a consumer of content and technology, right? There's this concept of audience capture. I'm sure you've heard, right? Like this is basically like you're a podcaster or like a Substack writer, and you talk about, I mean, the famous case is like people who are like skeptical of vaccines. And then they get like this massive spike in traffic, and then they think more and more along those lines. And it almost like sculpts the person and how they think, and they become captured by the people who they somehow reached via the algorithm. And I'm like New Yorker, like I feel like you're less susceptible to that sort of audience capture. But I'm curious because I've seen things like The Atlantic, which I love The Atlantic, but you know I follow them on Instagram, and it's like every post feels like a hot take now. It's like, you need to stop doing this. We need to stop normalizing it. Yes, it's all very like declarative, very like emphatic statements. How do you think it affects the creator side too, like the writing side?
I mean, there's a real pressure on all kinds of creators to shape their work to the feed, like to shape their work to what they know about their audiences, to deliver what's expected of them. And once you hit on a thing that works, as you were describing with The Atlantic, then you're going to keep doing it. Like, it's like a bit of a slot machine or something. It's like when you hit the right combination, you want to go for that combination all the time. So I think you see that with The Atlantic's contrarian ideological hot takes, or like the New York Times has its 2-sentence headline format that's like, you know, college students are protesting on campuses. Here's why that's a problem, or whatever. And it works. It like triggers something in our lizard brains, and we click on the link. So I think as creators, or as like producers of content, let's say, we, on the one hand, we have to adapt ourselves to that ecosystem in order to get seen. And on the other hand, we have to resist that pull in order to remain who we are, in order to like have some kind of authenticity to our voice. So I think there's so much pressure to homogenize yourself, to put yourself into a category. But then I don't think it's satisfying to anyone to just like hit that combination every time, or to ruthlessly adapt yourself. I did speak to one TikTok creator Nigel Kavina, who I kind of watched become incredibly famous on TikTok over a few years. And he did ruthlessly optimize his content. Like he made cooking videos and he just made sure by looking at the TikTok data that he was capturing people's attention at every single second, at every single clip. And it really worked for him. He has 5 million, followers now. But I think that the art, let's say, suffers a bit from this, ruthless adaptation to an algorithmic feed. It's like, it's an inhuman thing. Mm-hmm. Humans on our own without technology are not designed to be captured in that way. Like we don't need our attention triggered every microsecond.
Well, look, so like my experience, unfortunately, is like I read on LinkedIn a lot. It's like this whole weird B2B world where you're like trying to be an influencer, like a thought leader. You're writing like content about, SEO and like, oh, here's the future of like account-based marketing. It's a weirder world, right? Like I think it's a little cringe. But every time I sit down, I look at the blank little LinkedIn thing and I'm like, I don't want to do this. And I've never felt that on writing a blog post. I've never felt that on writing, say, like an email newsletter. And in my rant, I wrote about that where I said something about like, there's this word hook, which is basically like the first line. It's kind of like the clickbait thing that causes somebody to stop scrolling and read through the rest of the post. And I complained about this idea that I needed to sort of format everything in the same way with a hook and like this one sentence by one sentence thing. And, I got a couple comments pushing back on that. They're like, look, you can still be yourself. You can still be authentic. You just have to like write the hook. But in my brain, I was like, well, no, like that makes my thoughts conform to a different, like, it's like the medium is the message, but like in a much more micro way. It's like the format is the message too. I can't have nuance if I like start with this emphatic, like declarative, you are doing things wrong statement. It actually transforms the message that I'm going to have too.
For sure. I mean, it's an archetype that got established for a reason because it works on readers, because it kind of complies with the style of the platform.
Yeah.
And it becomes exhausting. Like you have anxiety about doing it. It's boring. You feel like it doesn't reflect you personally. And yet you do it anyway in order to get traffic or attention or whatever. I think that balance of like staying yourself and molding to the form is something that exists like across so many of our experiences now, whether it's like what you post on Instagram or how you interact with TikTok or what you're posting for work on LinkedIn. Like it's almost like everyone is a celebrity. I think like you have to be so aware of modulating your public actions that I think it just causes like incredible amounts of anxiety.
I know, I think about that with kids growing up now. And I think there's been a couple of books that have come out about that. Like this idea that like at school, like you're insecure about like what your friends think about you, but now your like digital sense of self is also scrutinized at all moments. So I think that's a rabbit hole we probably don't want to go down here. That's like a whole, can of worms. But I'm curious, on one level, I listened to a podcast a couple of weeks ago with, it was on Sam Harris's podcast, and it was with Cal Newport. And I love Cal Newport, his whole deep work, slow productivity philosophy. And Sam Harris was on Twitter and like was, getting in all these like fights and like was just obsessed with it. And he quit Twitter. He kind of made this big stance. And Cal Newport being like the sort of antisocial, like do deep work, write deep books, like that whole thing. They had a long discussion about it. And Sam talked about how it actually changed his thinking with regards to like what content he was putting out, what types of podcasts. He's like, it lengthened the window that I had to think about a topic and decide whether I wanted to react on it or not. And lo and behold, in most cases, he's like, I didn't have to react on it. Like it was like a week later, it didn't matter. So I'm curious with your experience on your algorithmic cleanse, if you found any ways that it changed your thinking, your ideation for your writing, any sense of like you as a creator or a thinker.
It did. It made me slow down a lot in that same way. I mean, I think I spent the better part of a decade being a freelance writer, being hyper aware over the 2010s of what was going on Twitter. And like, I tailored my thoughts to that. I tailored my writing to that. I really judged my success by what got the most likes on Twitter. And, in the middle of the decade, that might have been true. Like it was a great way to build my career as a writer. But when I got off all of these platforms, it really did make me reset that relationship and realized that really it does not matter like what the meme of the day is on Twitter. It doesn't matter what the fight is or the discourse. It is most often just going to pass by and no one's ever going to talk about it again 24 hours or 48 hours later. So I think I was able to maybe revalue my own thoughts, like understand that what I was thinking, what I was generally curious about or pulled toward was just as significant as what was trending on Twitter or what might provoke the most reaction online. And I think that was inspiring to me. Like it gave me some more creative freedom to pursue things that I may not have otherwise, and also to consume things that I may not have otherwise, like looking further afield for books or going to more art galleries or just letting more randomness happen to me rather than judging myself by what was going on in the feed.
And did you feel like the quality of ideas through those different inspiration sources was better, different? Like how did like the output differ based on that?
I mean, better is hard to judge. Like, I'm sure I thought it was better in the moment, but I don't know. I mean, I think it was more unique, let's say, like when you are not trying to second guess what will succeed in the feed, when you are not responding to what's going on that day, you are thinking about things that fewer people are thinking about. Like you're getting away from the dominant idea of the day and you're wandering into some other territory. So I think that's really interesting. Like I think the pressure of being on social media, of posting, of adapting yourself to the feed is like homogenizing our overall thoughts, like as a group of, millions of creators and writers and thinkers and whatever, we are all being funneled into these kind of coercive, tight channels. And thus we're not wandering off on our own. We're not going back through history. We're not thinking about what inspires us uniquely. So I think I brought in more new influences into what I was thinking about and doing than I would have otherwise, which I think is probably good, right? We need new ingredients. Like we need to add some stuff to the soup rather than just recycling the same things over and over.
I think it's probably hard when you're building up an audience and you're just starting out, right? You almost need to like ride the wave to be able to get in front of people. And we look at that. So we do, like our agency, we work with brands on like SEO and content marketing. And the way we look at SEO is often as like a landing pad or like a first experience. And then we hope to convert them to sort of an email list where you can actually say what you want to say. And you're like, you've got an audience, right? Like you've been right. Like you've been around. So I think like you've got a stance now where you could write something that maybe wouldn't adhere to an algorithm and like people would still read it. And I think that's a cool, like, I don't want to say place of privilege, but like, if you've got an audience, you've kind of got an ability to like, to step outside a little bit and introduce maybe something net new to the public discourse.
Right. I mean, it is a bit of a privilege to have cultivated an audience. I think there's always a way to do it, right? Like, I feel like I did my time by like hustling on Twitter and being a freelance writer and just developing an audience for what I wanted to do. And then you have to pull them down the funnel. Like we are all marketing funnels. Every single creator online, every human being almost now is a marketing funnel.
It's such a sad way to put it, but I love it.
It's like, okay, the conversion for me is like a random person encountering my writing and then gradually signing up for my email newsletter and then buying a book, hopefully. But maybe like even a random person is like, okay, I want someone I might want to date to like look at my Instagram profile and then click on a few images and then like send me a message and like convert in a way by going on a date or whatever. And it's just like, that is a whole different, it's not necessarily algorithmic, but that is like a dynamic that exists in so many interactions now where you have to like attract someone's attention and then gradually convince them to do something that's more difficult or more friction heavy. So I'm really happy. Like my favorite audience to write for fun is my personal Substack newsletter. because I
Totally.
know all those people. Like the 7,000 people on there, I know they like me. Like I know they're down with what I'm doing. I know I can go weird places or just like reflect on things that I definitely couldn't in a more public venue. And so I've worked to develop that context and like expand people's minds little by little, maybe, of just like what I do. And I find that really creatively fulfilling. And I've done, I mean, over time, I've made a few different like newsletter products, and I enjoy making these like different containers for what I want to do. Because I do feel like online, you have to build a context for each different thing that you want to do. Otherwise, you're just floating on these algorithmic feeds and you end up flattening your own voice over time.
Wait, tell me more about that. So you built like newsletter products and you're packaging these in a very specific context. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, so just editorially, like as a journalist, you know, the golden standard is a great print magazine. Like a great print magazine is a combination of content in different formats that captures your attention and entertains you. So I feel like email newsletters are kind of the best iteration of that today, where they have a finite context. It's a space in which to experiment or put a bunch of different things together. So kind of parallel to my personal writing career, I've started maybe like 3 editorial projects, which were Study Hall, which is like a newsletter and community for freelance writers, and then Dirt, which is a newsletter about digital culture that also runs on some Web3 functions. And now this newsletter, One Thing, which is basically about lifestyle and taste and like cool stuff. So I like having those different brands. Like I think each one creates its own identity and creates a sense of familiarity and context in which you can create meaning and relate to people in new ways. So I think I create those different situations rather than trying to pack it all in just under my name or just under my writing for a publication, because the context helps. Like the container being different helps you understand the content in a different way.
Or like maybe like it's like a promise to the eventual user that says, here's what you're to expect if you sign up for this, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. You need to know what you're promising. like with One Thing, which has been super fun. The promise is it's about one thing. Like the promise is that it's short. You can consume it at one go. It'll inform you about something interesting. And then that's it. Like,
that's cool.
Not trying to keep you up on the news, not trying to give you a ton of different links or whatever. It's just about one thing. And so I find that really entertaining and amusing. And I think it helps the reader or consumer relate to that product.
Yeah, absolutely. And so are you writing all of this, or are you like building kind of an ensemble of like different contributors, or like what's the makeup of these projects?
Yeah, I mean, each time it's all collaborative. So I had co-founders with Study Hall and Dirt, and those two I'm now exited from totally. And I think, I mean, the parallel with that idea of making different containers is that it can't just be you. like I think a problem we have with the creator-driven internet is it's just a series of individual people. And that's unsustainable because one person cannot manage all the tasks of maintaining a digital presence and like a more or less publication or TV broadcast unit, basically. So my philosophy is you have to bring in other people as fast as possible and like develop a voice as an entity, as a container, rather than just as one person.
That's so interesting. Like in our space right now, the creator-led go-to-market is very popular in that people are sort of shying away from, and it's a different space, obviously, like media and then B2B software, very different worlds. But B2B is starting to look towards media as a model to garner attention. And they're saying like, hey, like nobody's looking at like Salesforce as a brand. They want to hear from like the VP on whatever subject.
Yeah.
But I've seen even like what you're saying, like there's sort of a fragility in that. Like there's sort of a, in the context of business, it's like that person leaves the company. Like what happens next? Like, do they take their audience with them? What happens to Salesforce garner do they keep any of that value? It does seem like there's a little bit of like fragility and like relying on one single person to sort of carry all the weight of the audience.
Yeah, I think it's completely true. Like, most often that person leaves or gets burnt out or just like can't sustain that kind of presence or production on their own. And so I think that's kind of what makes me nervous with this rash of creator-led stuff, where it's like these people either need to build small teams or join an agency or whatever, or band together in some way. Otherwise, it is just unsustainable in the long term. Like the modern internet, the social platforms have only existed for 15 years. And like people are getting destroyed by living their lives through that and hustling for a decade or more in their career until they reach a point of burning out like a YouTube creator or just like frying themselves on internet celebrity. And so I think even though the creator idea is so popular right now, we have to think to the next stage of it. Like, sure, consumers love the individual human being. They love the individual face and voice. But we need to figure out how it's not just that, how it's more about a container or a brand or
like an entity, right? Something that's a little bit more sustainable, maybe has a little bit less flexibility in terms of adapting to the daily algorithm differences, but like moves beyond and kind of like if like we're dealing with like waves, peaks and valleys, it kind of sustains itself through those, whereas a creator kind of lives and dies by this.
Yeah. Creators live and die day to day by the peaks of algorithmic traffic. And that's kind of sad as well. I mean, it's funny to think, I was trying to think of what is an example of this. And what comes to mind most is something like Lil Miquela, the like CGI influencer. So this is...
I'm not familiar.
Oh, so it was a project done by like a kind of small creative studio. And it was basically a CGI avatar woman who began posting on Instagram and like relating to all these fashion brands and posing in various photos and stuff as if it's a human influencer. Mm-hmm. So it's a kind of rendered human influencer.
Wow.
Who is not a real person, but who can, collaborate with Chanel or Louis Vuitton or whatever. And so there's like, it's like the consumers relate to the character who is a single character, but there's no one human behind that. Like the agency just controls what this entity does.
And it's effective? So, like, does it work?
Yeah. I mean,
people actually respond to this.
Yeah. I think Lil Miquela's ad rates are like not quite what they are for an actual human being, thankfully.
Yeah, right.
It's like the creators have given interviews where they're like, yeah, the best part is she never disagrees with the deal. Like, and it's scalable.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And she's never going to burn out on the algorithm. Like, I think that whole idea of like, if you are completely reliant on, especially TikTok, Instagram Reels, right? There's differences. Some algorithms seem a little bit more stable. Like SEO is, for all the volatility, like largely, like if you are doing well on SEO, you will do well on SEO next year. Whereas you had a couple stories in Filter World about people who had like really optimized for it, and then they just got tanked as soon as like the algorithm changed favor. And that capriciousness, like that's a terrifying thing for a human, but for an AI, like whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean the emotional effect of those algorithmic changes, I think, is something that's not perceived enough yet, not studied enough yet. It's like when we're almost establishing our identities, not to mention our businesses on these platforms, we judge ourselves by what the algorithm tells us about ourselves.
Totally.
Tells us about our successes or failures. And that is totally capricious because it's controlled by the tech companies who don't care about the emotional well-being of like one talent on their platform. And I think, I compare the Filter World ecosystem a lot in the book to what we had, 40 or 50 years ago, which was a more human cultural ecosystem of people making decisions about what should be seen or who should be promoted. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of problems with that, whether it's bias or, flawed decision making or just bad taste. But I do think there's an extent to which a record label executive cares about a musician in a way that Spotify does not care about a musician at all. Like LinkedIn doesn't care about one business influencer or another. They just care that the overall tide is still moving. So I regret the passing away of that slightly more human ecosystem in which a person's mental well-being was slightly more registered than it is now.
It is interesting because there's some sense that like the amount of attention, if you identify as a creator especially, but even if you don't, you know, if I post something on Instagram and nobody likes it, I'm like, oh, who am I? You know, it's like this digital like facsimile of status. And if that suddenly gets wiped away, especially if it's how you make money, like, but like, yeah, that sense of like, I think the platforms, there's this concept, ergodicity about like probabilities, and it's like ensemble probability versus like time series probability. So like one person playing Russian roulette over time is a bad idea, right? But ensemble, like, you know, it could be a great expected value because most people aren't going to die, right? So it's like Spotify doesn't care about maybe the individual artist over time. They care about like the peaks of the whole ensemble. And yeah, that doesn't necessarily lend itself to like, you know, Alex Burkett trying to make his name on LinkedIn as an influencer.
Right. I mean, I think to me, the platform's view of culture, like my book is primarily about culture, right? It's about art and music and travel and food and whatever. The idea of seeing the production of culture as like an ensemble probability or a space to be optimized or just a series of engagement metrics is like fundamentally bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's fundamentally deadening. It's not what we want out of our art. It's not what we've historically valued in art. And yet now we are letting these metrics and these like capricious systems dictate how we create and consume art or culture.
Yeah.
And to me, that's just like bad on its face, essentially. Like we could just start there and say, this is bad.
This is bad.
And that's it. We don't read the rest of the book. Just be like, is it bad that only things that get attention get more attention? Yes. Okay. Like let's figure something else out.
You know what I wish? This is maybe like a personal thing, and I just thought of it, but like I almost wish there was like multiple algorithms that I could set side by side, because I'm realizing that when I travel, sometimes I enjoy going to a Starbucks because of the sense of familiarity. And their nitro cold brew is actually top tier, no matter what anybody says. Totally. It's a very good nitro cold brew.
Scalable product.
It's good, right? And you know there's going to be good Wi-Fi. It's very middle of the road. But like, I don't want everything to be subject to that same algorithmic filter, because sometimes I want the weird.
Mm-hmm.
So like in music, this is going to be the dumbest example, but I'm just going to, sometimes you want the Nickelback. Sometimes you want the avant-garde, right? But like, shouldn't all be subject to the same attention-based filter.
Absolutely. And that is the fundamental problem of these platforms, is that they only work in one way for all the people on the platform. And we users have next to no agency in interacting with them. Like, we can't flip a switch and turn the recommendation algorithm off. We can't adjust the variables ourselves. We can't say, oh, you know, I'm in the mood for some weirder stuff right now. Surprise me a little more. And I think that's too bad. If we're allowing these systems to dictate so much of our consumption habits, shouldn't we be able to tell them what we're feeling? Like, shouldn't we be able to talk back in a stronger way? And I think we can't. I mean, a lot of people would never choose to, right? Most users are passive and won't change the defaults. But like, I think we're overall hitting a wall because we can't talk back to these things, because the platforms treat us just as eyeballs and ears who have no agency or personal desires to express.
Well, look, you hit on something really interesting, because that was a big pushback on this rant on LinkedIn that I posted that eventually led to meeting you and reading your book. A lot of people were like, well, if you're tired of your feed, if you're getting the same thing, you know, all the stuff that you already know you like, you have to go out of your way to follow people that are outside of your bubble and to engage with things that are outside of your bubble. But I'm like, I don't know how to do that, because it's almost like a chicken and egg problem, right? Like, if I'm only getting fed the stuff that I know and like, how do I know who else to follow and like? It seemed like an impossible task.
The functions don't exist. those options. The only option we have right now is doing that, is like clicking on different things, is following new accounts in a way to signal to the algorithm that we're bored and want to see something else. But wouldn't it be easier if we could just say that directly and be like,
yeah.
I think it might have been because of some data regulation in the European Union or just an experiment, but there was some headline about TikTok offering like an algorithm reset option for your account. So just let's start over. Like, erase all the stuff that I have said that I like. Let's like start from scratch again. And I think that would be really good and healthy. Like, I don't need the data from my interactions from 3 or 4 years ago to dictate what I'm seeing right now.
Yeah.
So I would love more agency in that regard, more ways to talk back. I think if tech platforms don't do that in some way, then they risk just gradually alienating everyone who is on their platforms.
I mean, anecdotally, I'm hearing a lot of that already. It is also kind of a funny concept that we're like, we need to like protest click, you know, we're like, I don't like this, but I'm going to click it just because I'm tired of all the things that I like.
How is that efficient? Like, how is forcing the user to kind of like hack it on their own a better experience?
It requires such a strong degree of consciousness in a platform where, I mean, to be real, and like TikTok and whatever, like a lot of the time you're going there to be unconscious. Like you're not going there to like make conscious choices.
Right. Like it is about your subconscious. It's about just like surfing. And I think, I mean, sometimes if I'm interested in something on TikTok, I'll like go search for it, watch a few videos. And I know that also informs the For You feed that I like that subject. And so more often than not, it'll feed me some more of that stuff. So I don't think that's a hard signal to give. It's more like when you don't like something that it's harder to get rid of. Mm-hmm. Like I talked to one woman in my book who was just getting plagued with astrology recommendations on Twitter. And this is to the point, like she had gotten interested in astrology, then found it was causing her a lot of anxiety, like too much thinking about where the planets are. And so she wanted to get rid of it. But Twitter didn't let her change her minds. Like it was harder to say that she disliked that, to say, don't give me any more of this. No matter how many times you say, you know, don't show me this recommendation or I don't like it, it's really hard to move on. And that's another inhuman way that the platforms treat us.
Okay, so I had a similar example, and it's like kind of embarrassing because it showed, like I genuinely, I did look at these, but like on Twitter for a while, I was getting shown like street fight videos all the time. And it's like, it's such a salacious thing that like, I didn't want to watch it. Like, I don't want to watch street fights, but when I would see it on my feed, I would stop scrolling and I'm like, I gotta see how this ends, you know? and then I'm like, my whole Twitter is just like world star hip hop. And I'm like, no, I can't do this. Right. Eventually it went away because I think I started muting and you know, engaging with other stuff consciously, but it was sort of an absurd, like Fisherian runaway, like arms race where I was just like, the attention was so, it was so salacious, right? You can't look away.
Right. It's trapping your attention. And it's, I think another point of the book and of my critique overall is like, the things that attract your attention the most are not the things that you value the most. Like you are not watching the street fighting videos because you value them and you think they add to your life. They're just like triggering something in your brain that's like, I have to watch this.
Fucking cotton candy for the brain.
Right.
And actually, so I listened to the podcast you did with Ezra Klein and y'all talked about that, the sense of like, the books that you would recommend, or I think, I can't remember how you phrased it, but the books that had the lasting impact on you were often not even books that you would say you liked the most. There was sort of a memorable aspect that couldn't be contained in this idea of like, oh, I engaged with it, I liked it, I recommended it to everybody. It was just like something maybe challenging or like novel. And those were the ones that actually lasted. So it's like that kind of encapsulated that feeling for me.
Right. I think the way I sometimes put this is like, the songs that you listen to the most often are not the ones that mean the most to you necessarily. Like the books that you read and reread are not necessarily the most meaningful books to you. They're just the ones you turn to for entertainment or they're comfortable or whatever. So I think you have to kind of decouple the idea of cultural value from the idea of attention and engagement, because it's not the things that we engage with the most that are necessarily the most important. It is that one book that totally changed your life, or the one painting that you'll never see again, that sticks in your brain forever. And those experiences are so unique and powerful and like are what makes us human and not just YouTube viewers. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I want to prioritize those and emphasize those and have people seek those out more. And you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable in those experiences too. Like it's not just the TikTok hypnotic state. Mm-hmm. It's art and culture is supposed to make you uncomfortable in some ways. It's supposed to surprise or challenge you. And that is often what ends up being the most meaningful.
I'm curious, was there a moment that you can specifically point to or remember where you realized that this idea was something worth pursuing, eventually leading to the book? Was there like a moment of reflection or observation? Was it the coffee shop thing, the airspace, or like what was the impetus for all of this?
I started thinking about this book probably in 2015, 2016. So that was when I wrote this essay, Welcome to Airspace, which was basically observing the generic coffee shop design that's all over the world now, with white subway tile and reclaimed wood furniture and ceramic cups with latte art in your cappuccino and avocado toast. So in that essay, I kind of traced the generic coffee shop aesthetic back to Instagram and Airbnb, which were these algorithmic platforms that influenced physical space. And that essay did really, really well. I think it was very influential through to this day. But I didn't have the whole theory yet. Like, I think that was very early in this process of like our algorithmic world. And so I wrote a different book, which is about minimalist aesthetics, which got at some of the same topics in a different way. But then after writing that book, then I was like, okay, I think these subjects of homogenization and algorithmic influence are still totally alive and relevant, you know, even 4 years later, which is not necessarily the case. Like, the internet changes so fast. So I think when I observed that longevity, then I knew that a book would be justified. Though even when I was writing this book, which I started for real probably in 2021, I was afraid that it would become irrelevant. I was afraid the internet would change, or, you know, algorithmic influence would not be so blatant or something. I was afraid something would happen. And instead, it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. So in a way, I feel lucky that it, you know, these problems became even more acute, if anything. But I also feel bad for myself and everyone online who has suffered through this horrible era.
Well, at the very least, the salience of this problem is higher too. So I think in terms of like the book's resonance, at least people are more noticing of this phenomenon. We're almost at time. I wanted to ask you sort of an obnoxiously tactical question, channeling my, you know, Tim Ferriss. All right, what do you do, right? So with exiting the algorithmic cleanse, you learned a lot from that experience. Eventually you went back. Like, what's the balance that you've struck now in terms of like being a consumer, you know, figuring your own way through culture while also interplaying with these platforms? Like, what do you do in life now to engage?
Yeah, I think after doing the algorithm cleanse, after like writing this book and going through the publishing process, which also forced me to think through it, you know, another infinite number of times. Like, I was fully consumed by algorithmic stuff. Like, I've thought through every thought in this book. And I think where it landed me was like, I know I have a better sense of what I'm turning to each space for. So I know when I'm going on TikTok, like, I'm just looking for the total mental erasure, like the unconsciousness that comes with that platform and its algorithmic feed. On Twitter, I know that I'm going there just to like see what the internet discourse is, to see what is the you know, herd instinct online. At the same time, I'm more conscious of like, I am going to an art museum in DC where I live to see this show and be inspired by it. I want to go to this concert because I want to like inject some new cultural experience into my life. I'm also reading habits are a whole nother thing, but I think I've been much more likely and like push myself more to just follow whatever random thread that I find that's interesting in books. Like, it's not about the latest self-help book or, you know, the popular novel or nonfiction book of today, but instead like finding a historian whose work I like, then reading every single book he wrote, or like finding a random subject and then going down the rabbit hole a little bit. I think I try to both. I mean, my job is an internet columnist. Like, I have to write about what's going on online. So I have one track where it's like, okay, really being online and being conscious about what's going on. And then another that's just seeking out your own inspiration that's different from other people's, that is maybe bringing something new into the conversation that no one else is looking at right now. I think we need more of the latter, probably. Like, we need more people who are like, oh, I just found this random book from 1973 and it's totally blowing my mind. Rather than...
I want more of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's hard to do. I mean, why it doesn't happen as much is it's much harder to do that than to like listen to an AI generated summary of another business book or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's more valuable. Fundamentally, it's more valuable to bring something new in than to just rehash what already is here.
Mindfulness. I think entering life with more mindfulness could benefit us in so many ways. This is so fun. This is awesome. Thank you so much for doing this conversation. Where can people find you online? What do you want to point people to?
Get offline.
TikTok.
Don't even try. No, I'm on Twitter /X still too often at Chayka K, which is my last name, first initial. My personal Substack is kylechayka.substack.com, which I post to intermittently. And then my main like fun project is one thing newsletter.substack.com, which is just, recommend some potato chips, talk about cultural trends, think about what makes a good restaurant. It's just kind of like my cultural diary in a way.
And everybody read Filter World. Turn your laptops down, just go sit on a couch and read. Thank you so much. This was really fun.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It was a good conversation.